Mexico, the summer of the year 1519. A traveler reaches the royal palace of the great Montezuma, bringing news which is both incredible and unsettling. The man says he's seen a mountain floating on the water which moved without ever touching land. The priests of the great temple are worried. Is it some sort of threat? What god or demon could cause such a strange phenomenon? Montezuma, on the other hand, is convinced that the mysterious sighting heralds the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy, the return of a powerful god to his people. But he's wrong. The floating mountain is about to let onto his shores treacherous men with pale skin and thick beards who've come from a land far away. And Montezuma would soon find out that the arrival of these men foreshadowed the end of the glorious and powerful Aztec Empire. In Mexico City, during excavation work in 1978 near the cathedral, a heavy slab was unearthed, decorated with magnificent bas-reliefs that someone a very long time ago had smashed and buried. Researchers wondered who could have smashed this beautiful work of art, and why. To find these answers, we have to go back in time to the year 1519, when Mexico City, one of the world's largest and most populated cities, did not yet exist. In its place was an extraordinary and incredible city, Tenochtitlan. This was the capital and the heart of the grandiose Aztec Empire. The monarch, who had the power of life and death over his subjects, was Montezuma II, descendant of another Montezuma, the great leader who founded the empire and built the grand monuments at Tenochtitlan. Like his ancestor, Montezuma was a highly religious sovereign, particularly devoted to the god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, to whom hundreds of temples were dedicated. Quetzalcoatl was an extremely benevolent god, the only god in the Aztec pantheon opposed to human sacrifices. The sacred texts state that the god had left the land promising that he would return to redeem his people. And according to the Aztec calendar, the year 1519, by our current calendar, ended one of the sacred cycles. This meant that Quetzalcoatl would soon return, and that's what Montezuma thought when he heard of the floating mountain on the sea. But in 1519, it was not a god that arrived, but conquistador Hernan Cortes. And the floating mountain was a Spanish galleon full of soldiers and weapons. Thinking he was a god, the Aztecs received Cortes with honors and adulation. In return, Cortes went on to destroy the Aztec capital and exterminate its population. Montezuma died, and his successor, Cuitlahuac, was forced to surrender. But how was such a rout possible? The invaders wielded devastating weapons and equipment completely unknown to the indigenous population: cannons, rifles, pistols, and horses, which proved to be formidable war machines. The conquistadors inadvertently brought another devastating weapon, a viral disease, smallpox. Smallpox found virgin territory in the New World. Millions died, over 2/3 of the Aztec population. Among them, the last king, Cuauhtémoc, whose death marked the end of the great ancient civilization of the Aztecs. Maybe if there were no disease, the Aztec soldiers might have fared better against the invaders. They were considered noble warriors and often used predators like eagles as their symbols of strength. These 6-foot statues, now in the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, depict how they would have looked. The statues once guarded the gates to a temple called, appropriately, Temple of the Warriors. Tenochtitlan was a grand city that stood in the middle of a large lake on a plateau surrounded by mountains. The first inhabitants of the area were tenacious souls who did not shy away from hardship. They transformed their settlement into one of the most extensive and populous metropolises of the then known world. Their projects included dams, canals, and the draining of swamps. When the soldiers would come back from victorious battles with their spoils of war, they would visit the big market of Tlatelolco. Here they might try to bargain for some precious fabric or rare bird feathers to enrich their attire. Tlatelolco stood at the present site of Mexico City's Plaza de las Tres Culturas. Remains of the ancient Aztec market are still found here, along with traces of a more recent past. Archaeologists have unearthed a main pyramid, rebuilt 14 times, along with other pyramids, platforms, stairs, and altars. In the middle of the plaza stands the Baroque church of Santiago de Tlatelolco, and not far off, the modern-day Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Unfortunately, to build this skyscraper and the adjacent road, the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl and a minor temple dedicated to his worship were sacrificed. Tlatelolco probably wasn't much different from a modern Mexican market. The faces, the voices, the smells, and the many colors of the fruits, vegetables, spices, meats, and other goods for sale are probably the same. Europeans owe the richness of their cuisine to the peoples of America. Until they discovered the New World, they knew nothing of potatoes, tomatoes, corn, peppers, or eggplant. At Tlatelolco, fabrics, skins, pottery, and other commonly used objects were displayed and traded by Aztec merchants called Pochtecans. They would hawk their goods not for currency like gold coins, but in trade for precious cocoa beans. The market was the commercial heart of their world, but it was also the unfortunate theater for the last desperate resistance by the Aztecs during the siege of their capital in the year 1521. After the Spaniards conquered the area, they started building structures of their own, like the Cathedral of Mexico City. But instead of quarrying for new stones, they used stones from an Aztec temple dedicated to the god Quetzalcoatl. Construction of the cathedral was begun in 1573, but 250 years would pass before it was finished, ending up as a mix of very different styles. In spite of great efforts to consolidate its foundations, the cathedral is now unavoidably sinking into the swampy ground, an ironic end to a monument erected by the conquistadors to erase all traces of the glorious Tenochtitlan. Until the year 1978, it appeared as though the invaders had succeeded in their malicious intent. But then something completely unexpected happened. During excavation work for the Mexico City subway, workers digging a trench near the cathedral stumbled upon pieces of a gigantic and mysterious oval stone with a diameter of over 7 feet and a weight of nearly 9 tons. The stone was immediately identified as an Aztec relic and was truly an extraordinary find, inaugurating a new era for modern Mexican archaeology. The earth would soon yield the ancient vestiges of Tenochtitlan, an exceptional discovery comparable to that of the city of Troy. The archaeologist in charge of the work couldn't have had a more apt name: Eduardo Matos Montezuma. He decided to demolish a whole block of the modern city and give back to Mexicans the heart of their ancient capital. From the many relics that have now been discovered, scientists are able to imagine how the magnificent ancient capital might have looked. The center of Tenochtitlan, situated between the cathedral and the Palacio Nacional on the Grand Plaza of the Zócalo, was mainly a place of worship, full of temples erected on the tops of pyramids with their characteristic steep stairways and colorful wall paintings. The city, at an elevation of over 6,500 feet, was surrounded by the lake, hills, and mountains. It was connected to the main